At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Arnold, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Hey, it's really great to have you. I'm laughing because, people ask me, who are you interviewing? And I say, they're from all over. In this case, we happen to be out of the U.S. on both counts. So where are you located?
I'm currently located in Romania, but my passport says I'm Dutch.
You're Dutch, but you're in Romania.
Yes, correct.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, listen, what I'd love for you to do is to share the audience your story, kind of your background, and what brought you to the point of what you're doing now, which seems to be so important.
Yes, what I'm doing now is I call myself the brain fitness trainer. So for me, it's very applicable, the quote of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who says, life is understood backwards but lived forwards. So I can give you now a nice story, but the moment I was living, I had no clue. Yeah?
Okay.
So I grew up in a family in the Netherlands, which in hindsight, if you would, with today's knowledge, a lot of the members were having mental illness in some form or another, but it was never diagnosed like that. So I had to deal with that myself. Yeah? That was very challenging for, I would say, everyone. Fast forward a couple of years, but that was my first encounter with real mental illness. Fast forward, I went to university. I went into the corporate world, had leadership positions where I was responsible for, my first job was for 10 marketing people. And at some point in time, I was responsible for 6,000 people and $1.2 billion business, which showed me that if you treat people as unique human beings, you can accomplish with your team so much and much more than people anticipate. And instead of using people as mechanics, as cogs in a machine, but as individual humans who can contribute and work together, you can really upgrade your brain as I see it now. Then a couple of years later, I ended up living in Budapest in Hungary, and I worked a lot with, at the end, teenagers like 17, 18, up to people in their 20s, beginning 30s. And that was the first time that I encountered with young people, where so many of these young people were really having had experiences with mental illness. They had, most of them, they already had experience with being stressed out or burnout. And what touched me the most, Doug, was that everyone I spoke with is that they said, we know someone who killed him or herself. And this was 9 years ago. Yeah. So that was that experience again with mental illness. The last 8 years, I took care of my mother. She was at the end of her 80s, and later on, a year and a half ago, she died. But my mother had dementia and Parkinson's. So I had this experience throughout my life with mental illness, but also with mental fitness, because my experience is that also in my coaching, I'm coaching people next year for 50 years. It's my experience that basically any human being can be and do much more than what they're basically were told or told themselves.
Okay. And, you know, it's fascinating. As I mentioned to you before we actually came on the air, there's a number of things that have been in your bio that I'd like to read for the audience because I think it will really give them a sense of where we're going to go with this discussion, if that's all right with you.
Yes, of course.
And you know, you talk about the art of unconditioning, and it says you don't know that you're being conditioned to conform to live someone else's life. And I call that the imposter syndrome. You don't know how your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual capabilities are intentionally being suppressed. You don't know why you're not taught how to live life. You feel stressed, powerless, and not good enough in a world where others are pulling the strings. And your brain is hijacked by parents, teachers, clergy, bosses, media, and entertainment. And your body is hijacked by food, fashion, pharmaceutical industry, and it goes on and on. So really, what you're talking about here is the fact that we really, many of us really aren't able to actually be ourselves. We can't really be who we are. And we end up becoming, or we end up being what someone else tells us we need to be. And ultimately, we find that that creates, as you have talked about, it can be some very emotional issues, it can be some mental issues, it can lead to all sorts of catastrophic situations. And in many cases where it's not that catastrophic, you still have our young people and middle-aged people and just people in general growing up and aging and never experiencing life as they could. Your thoughts?
Yes. And that is very unfortunate. And that creates a lot of these diseases in people. Mental, emotional, spiritual, physical disease. This is you're uncomfortable in your skin. And what I say, the main reason is, yeah, that's logical because you're not living your own life, you're living someone else's life.
So what, you know, you talk about mental illness and you've talked about that quite a bit initially. And obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist. I know you're not a psychiatrist. But as we look at people who are experiencing that emotional issue that is really affecting their brains to a high degree, what do you feel the causes of that are? As you've researched this out over time, what do you feel the causes of mental illness really are?
Well, the main cause is that you're not living your own life. You're living the life that other people expect you to do. Yeah? So it's from the moment you're born. When are you a good kid? When you do exactly what your parents tell you to do. Then you go to school. When are you a good student? When you do what your teacher tells you to do. Maybe you go to some kind of education or university, doesn't matter, same story. Is when are you a good student? When you do what the teacher tells you to do. Then most likely you do start work. When are you a good employee? When you do exactly what your boss tells you to do. So by the time we're 25, the only thing what we have learned is to meet expectations of other people. The only thing what we have learned is to live that life, is what do they expect from me? And if I do that correctly, then I'm okay.
Okay, so I want to change the wording a little bit, if you're okay with that, because as I have chatted and interviewed psychiatrists and you know very well-known psychologists, there certainly is a mental illness that is caused by biochemical disruptions in the brain, and it is something that absolutely exists that has nothing to do with what you're talking about right now. But when you're talking, what I kind of gather is you're really talking about emotional illness. You're talking about people living in an emotional state where they can't truly be happy, they can't be themselves. Uh, and to me, that is really what you're suggesting. Am I a little bit off the record here on that?
Yeah, mental and emotional, but mental and emotional is not separate from physical, is not separate from that. It's like we are integrated beings. So
Yes.
if you have emotional problems, they can manifest in a physical way and the other way around. If
Yes.
you are in a lot of pain, that can create mental and emotional problems.
Yes, and I have met and know a few people who literally have experienced mental illness, and it's a physiological biochemical issue. Something is happening within their brain that is literally causing them to go that way. So I want to focus, if it's okay with you, let's focus mainly on the emotional issues here about how people are being affected with emotional issues that yes, ultimately it can create some mental issues, but when we talk about emotion, that does affect the brain. There's no question about that. And as we talk about that, what do you feel that brain fitness is? As we get into that, what is it to have a fit brain?
For me, brain fitness is a state of physical and psychological well-being where individuals use her or his uniqueness, deals with the challenges in life, learns continuously, and contributes to people and planet.
Well, and as people are struggling emotionally to the point where, it can be considered a high level of emotional illness and even to the point of a little bit of mental illness, how how do we change and why is it so hard to change from that, in your opinion?
Because it is embedded in ourselves and in our society not to change. I said earlier is like we are most of us very conditioned until we at least 25 years old. There are exceptions, but at least 25 years. That is a lot of time. So if you want to change something which is embedded in yourself for 25 years, and people are in their 40s, it's for 40 years, or people in the, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a long-lasting habit. To change that takes quite some work. That is the reason why people are not doing that. And in our society, isn't it strange, Doc, that if at school, and it doesn't matter whether it's primary school, high school, university, whatever, personal change is not taught.
Yes, that is so true. In fact, in many cases, I know at least in the US, they kind of tell you who you are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, which is really unfortunate. So and I think as we talk about this, I think one of the important things for people to understand is that change can occur. And as we're talking about the brain, we're really talking about the fact that the brain can change. And through neuroplasticity, can you kind of explain to the audience what is neuroplasticity and how does it allow us to literally, if we choose to, make changes in our life and start to remove some of that highly emotional discomfort and start to be more focused on who we really are?
Yes, that is actually opposed to what up until 1998, where people thought is like, well, a lot of people say, that's just the way I am. Right?
Yeah.
That's just my personality. That's just the way I am. Yeah. And even parents and people, whatever, they thought until, well, basically the 2000s is that they couldn't change. So it was a given. Yeah? The finding, which was much earlier, but until people get to know this, neuroplasticity is your capacity to rewire your brain, to make new connections between the neurons. Yeah, that the rewiring is what we call learning. So we can basically in our brain make new connections until we're in our 90s. So our brain has this capacity to learn and grow and make new connections. And that is fantastic because it means that at any age, we can grow and change if we want to.
Well, and so as we talk about that, let's talk about the neural pathways within an individual's brain. What initially affects that so that as we're growing up and we're being affected, as you say, by teachers and by religion and by society and by social media and all of those things, what happens to those brain pathways that cause us to ultimately act, think, and behave in a way that really isn't to our advantage?
Well, you call it pathway. Let's use that word. Is those pathways become deeper and deeper embedded in yourself? It's like I use the metaphor of like a groove in an LP, yeah, in a record, yeah, with music, yeah. Sometimes, yeah, when you always play the same song, yeah, the groove becomes deeper and deeper. At some point in time, it doesn't go over to the next song. Yeah? It stays stuck in that old song. That happens in our brain in the same way.
Ah, okay. And so when that happens, and as you say, as we continue to reinforce that, and I think it's important for people to understand that we literally have the ability to change those neural pathways. And we have potentially unconsciously and being unaware of creating those neural pathways based on our environment and all those type of things that we've talked about. So what are the components that you have found? How does an individual that recognizes, all right, I'm not where I want to be, I'm not experiencing life the way I want to experience it, how do they change those neural pathways in a way to start developing different habits, different attitudes, and thus different experiences in life?
Yes, so the main thing is what I say is that you be curious, that you're open to learning, that you're open to gaining those new experiences, that you are, well, there's an old Chinese, Japanese saying, whereas that you're invited to have a beginner spirit. Whereas, like, yeah, you start all over again and, like, hey, assume I knew nothing or not too much. It's like, hey, now it's like, hey, I want to learn this. I want to do this. Yeah. As an example, I really was at the beginning of my 40s when my first coach asked me, and I can still vividly remember, and I was explaining, I was just out of a corporate job, and I was explaining to him, yeah, what I want. And basically, I was not saying what I want, I was saying what I don't want.
Uh-huh.
Yeah? I don't want a boss. I don't want this. I want to be a general manager or whatever. Yeah, I don't want this. I don't want that. And then he said, Arnold, I understand. But can you please tell me, what do you want? And I'm like, what? I don't know. This was, yeah, the only thing was general managing, but the rest, for the other one, I had such a list. And he asked, like, Arnold, what do you want? I had no clue. This was the first time in my life that anyone had asked me, Arnold, what do I want? Yes. The other thing, we're constantly reacting to what other people want from me. And since then, I've applied it to many, many of my clients, same response. They're all like, well, I don't know. So all the change starts there, where you say, like, who am I? What do I want in my life, in my work, in my relationships, in my hobbies, and everything? Start defining those things for yourself. And that is a whole process because, like I said, like I'm in my 40s when those first questions appear. Most people never get that question until they die. Yeah, so it is not an easy question because for so long it's not been asked, and you're very used to what other people expect from you, what other people want from you.
So how do you sit back, and how did you sit back with that coach working with you and helping you? How did you get to the point where you started to really understand what you wanted? Because so many times we have, as you say, so much of that peripheral environmental stuff coming in, telling us what they want us to be and who we should be. How did you get to the point where you started to truly identify what you wanted and who you wanted to be?
Well, that is a process. That is not a moment, but I really felt like, well, I can really easily express and talk myself. I'm not a shy person, but I was like, I had no clue. So that had a huge impact on me. That itself, that moment, which was like, I really didn't know anything to say. So I realized is that like, oh wow, that means I got to define it. I got to think about it. I got to feel about it. I got to read books or whatever. Things like, well, we're talking now about emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, well, all this stuff. I had no clue. I had no clue. Yeah, I was really successful in the business corporate world, so the mental side, let's call it like that, of things, and all of these other things, I barely know it existed. Yeah.
All right. So, you talk about how it may be different for individual people, but for you, what was the process step by step? If you don't mind sharing with the audience, what was the process step by step that you went through that you can share with the audience in order for you to finally get to the point where you knew what you wanted in life truly and who you were?
Yeah, well, that process is driven by curiosity. I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out about these things. Which, what is spirituality? What does it do for me? How does it help me? So I read books, articles. I joined a spiritual organization where I became a teacher. So it's that process, but the process around all of these topics. You can, people can find that is like you can split up your life. Let's call it in different categories. It's not just one big lump. Yeah, it's like what do you
Right.
want to do for career, what you do for your career, what you want to do for health, what you want to do for relationships, what do you want to do for your spirituality. So what do you want to do for your hobbies? So you can split things up in categories. So each of those, I started to explore. It's like, oh yeah, oh, I can define that, or I can do that. Or I'm like, oh, let's find that out. Yeah, so listen to podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. I'm listening to podcasts 10, 15 years. Yeah, so it's like, this is what I do every day. Yeah, so it like, so I'm like, that's how I'm learning. That's how I was like, oh, this is an interesting guest. Oh, he's written a book. Oh, well, let's buy that book. Yeah, so that's the
Okay.
whole process.
All right. So curiosity, and I totally agree with you, by the way, that curiosity is the key. But here's the question that came to my mind. And this is why I started smiling. We talk about the environment affecting us and telling us who we should be. Now we get curious and we listen to the podcasts. We maybe hire a coach, we read books about, and as you say, there's so many elements to our lives, whether it's spiritual, physical, health wise, mental, all of those type of things. How do we ultimately, or how did you ultimately, as you started reading books and listening to books on Audible and so forth, how did you decide what that was that you wanted to become versus them telling you, just another source telling you who you should be?
Well, that is why basically a lot of things is you got to experiment, you got to try. Yeah. So it like I often say to my clients, let's say the clients they have an idea is like, I want to own a horse, and then and I put it somewhere in the stable, and then each day after work I can go to my horse and take care of it and ride on my horse or whatever. And then I ask people, I say, "Oh, sounds nice, sounds really cool idea. Uh, have you ever rode a horse?" more than half people never have. I said, well, before you execute on that idea, yeah, why don't you try riding? Yeah? By the way, I learned riding on the horses only when in my 30s, and it's not easy, and it can be frightening and whatever. Yes, and it can be very uncomfortable. So it like that's why I say to all people, just experiment and try. It's like I want to be that, I want to do that. Whatever. Go and try. Yeah. That is what I did. So one of the main thing, yeah, I focused on startups. I did some startups. Most of them they still failed. Yeah, so like, okay, it's nice. I like that. Yeah, but I continued with my coaching, which I started years ago. But like more on the personal side, which I did first in sports. Yeah, and coaching. And went, oh, that works. That's including. Yeah, so. Well, and in the end, it's like, why am I now focused on brain fitness? Is basically when I had those experiences, which I said in the beginning, those phases in my life and everything where I'm like, well, what's happening inside of us? It's not only that, what's happening inside of us. Yes, so what I say, my quest is how the invisible drives the visible.
So, so as you went through that, and if I'm hearing you correctly, it's kind of, we experiment with different things. All right, this is what I want to do. And so you try it. And you try it before you spend money on it necessarily, maybe a little bit if you're renting or whatever. And if it feels good, then you continue on. If it doesn't feel good, then you recognize that, you know what, that's not really who you are. That's not really what you want. And as you go through that process, so this doesn't happen overnight, I take it. I take it that this takes years of concentrated effort and mindfulness to really ultimately achieve that goal of understanding who you are and achieving the life that you really want.
I even would like, I agree with you, yeah, but I would like to add to that is like, it's an ongoing process. I think it never ends.
Yes. All right. And I know one of the things which really makes me curious because you talk a little bit about slowing down aging. And, as you get past your 30s and 40s and you're into your 50s and your 60s and so forth, how does this process or what is the process that you have discovered that slows down aging and how does the brain affect that?
Well, there is research around it, is that the Sherjai doctors, it's husband and wife who were among them neuroscientists, and they found out is that if you give your brain what I call a why, a complexity and challenge, so you keep your brain very, very active, that is crucial to healthy aging. And that can prevent 60 to 90% of all the elderly diseases like Parkinson, Alzheimer, dementia. So I also use the similarity to physical aging. Is like after your age of 30, it's a given your physical health, your strength, everything like that starts to decline. In the beginning, it's very, very slow, but you don't notice it. But when you get into your 60s and 70s, whatever, your strength declines if you do nothing. And if you have not done anything, the same is true for your cognitive decline. After your age 30, your memory, everything slowly, and you don't notice it, but it starts to decline. And again, when you get older and older, it goes faster and faster. Both things combined are not necessary if you keep on training and using it. If you don't use it, you lose it. So really, that is true for your brain, but also for you.
Yeah, so you're talking about training the brain, training the body, and obviously curiosity helps to train the brain, and physical activity helps to train the body.
Absolutely.
And I'm reminded, and I can't remember the exact study, but I remember a study that was done that was shared with me where they took a number of men that were in their 60s, and they put them in an environment and had them start to speak, listen to music, do all those things that were in their 50s when they were in their early 50s. And after a period of time, they discovered that those people really started to become more youthful. They started to get back to their 50s. And to me, that is phenomenal. And yet, as you say, with the brain and the neuroplasticity, we can literally create that to a certain degree by ourselves. Now, how important is meditation, or do you even get into the aspect of meditation as you talk about these things?
By the way, I'm very well aware of that study. Yeah, it's incredible, and it shows that even a change in your environment has a huge impact.
Yes.
Yeah. The meditation part, like I said earlier, is that I was curious into spirituality, and that encompasses meditation. So I meditated something like 15 years or 20 years, something like that. I had two types of meditation, whatever. So I had that experience. The reason why I started meditation in the first place is that it drove me mad that I got constantly thoughts going on in my mind. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's like all the time, and it looked like it never stopped. So, and that's when I read something like a flyer from something like, oh, it helps with slowing down. You know, that's what I want. Yeah, so it's like, yeah. So I tried meditation, whatever, but at some point in time, I realized like it, how do you call it? It's curved off. Yeah, it's like there's no more benefit. It like it starts to irritate me a bit. Whatever. It's like okay, I stopped and stop means is like, okay, do I feel lousy now I stop, or do I feel okay or whatever? Yeah. So the stops with something is also an experimental process. It's like, yeah, maybe I should continue or maybe not. But for me, it's like I stop with it and I'm perfectly fine and whatever. So for me, that's part of a different phase. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm telling to people, you must meditate, you must do this, whatever. Try it.
Try it and see. And you know what I have found, and it's fascinating because I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals that talk about different pathways, like we're talking about today, of reaching that level of of the mindfulness and of the happiness and truly being ourselves. And what I find, and the reason I love to do this, is because each one has a slightly different approach. And what I love about that is that there will be someone that's listening today that goes, you know what? I've been trying to meditate and it's not working for me. And yet here I'm listening to someone who said the same thing. Whereas there are other people who are, we're talking about meditation and they're going, yeah, it really works. For me, it really works. I try to meditate every day. And as I've studied it and learned it, I recognize that as I add to that some verbal affirmations that I speak out loud as I'm meditating, it literally is creating the things that I want. It's during the neuroplasticity, it's changing the neural pathways because I'm doing that. But that's not for everybody. And that's what I appreciate you talking about here is the fact that, you have a specific way in which you have been able to achieve it. And that's what you're teaching your clients and the people that you're with. And to me, that's what's important is people listen, they recognize, oh, wow, this one makes sense to me. And that's where it really gets to be so wonderful is that everyone has a slightly different story, a slightly different pathway, but each pathway, there's someone else in the world, hopefully listening, that is going to hear that and go, you know what? That makes sense for me.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, that is what I promote, and is in essence is that we're all unique beings, and it doesn't mean that it's just one prescription which works for everybody. Yeah, so it's like you got to find out and tune to what works for you.
Yes, and so as we close a little bit here, What would be that message that you'd like to share with the audience that would make a difference as they're listening here?
My message would be is that you can upgrade your brain at any age. And how do you do that? By unleashing and using your uniqueness.
Wonderful. And let me ask you this, as people are listening, if they want to be able to reach you, how do they do that?
I would invite them to have a look at my website. It's called braingym.fitness. Braingym.fitness. They can find about my videos, they can find about my trainings, and they even can connect with me if you still have questions or unclarities, whatever. You can book an appointment with me and we'll have a conversation.
All right. Wonderful. Well, Arnold, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. And it's fascinating, as you have really focused on really making a difference by upgrading our brains. I think I love that. I love the combination of those words, upgrade your brain. And I think a lot of people never think of it that way. So I love what you've talked about there. And I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Oh, thank you. And folks, I hope this has made a difference. I hope there's some of you out there that are listening to this and going, okay, I got to reach Arnold because this is making sense to me where everything else I've heard hasn't made sense. So please reach out to Arnold if it makes sense to you. Meanwhile, please feel free to continue listening to our shows. And this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.